The moving truck pulled away from 412 Maple Grove Lane at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, leaving behind only tire marks on pristine asphalt and the lingering scent of diesel exhaust. Marcus Chen stepped onto his new front porch, surveying the picture-perfect suburbia that stretched before him like something from a Norman Rockwell painting. Manicured lawns stretched endlessly, each blade of grass seemingly cut to regulation height. White picket fences gleamed in the afternoon sun, and not a single piece of litter dared to mar the spotless sidewalks. After 12 years of deployments, firefights, and sleeping on hard ground in places most people couldn't pronounce, this slice of American tranquility felt almost surreal. The silence was profound. No distant mortar fire, no helicopter rotors chopping through the night, no shouted commands echoing across a compound. Just the gentle whisper of sprinklers and the occasional chirp of a bird. Marcus had chosen Willowbrook Estates deliberately. The online reviews praised its peaceful atmosphere, excellent schools, and strong community values. The HOA maintained high standards, they said, ensuring property values and neighborhood pride. After what he'd seen overseas, the idea of ordered, predictable community life felt like a warm embrace. The first sign something was wrong came exactly 72 hours later. Marcus woke at 5:30 a.m., as he had every morning for over a decade. Old habits die hard, especially when they've kept you alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan. He padded to his kitchen, started the coffee, and glanced out the front window as steam rose from his mug. His blood turned to ice. Someone had keyed his truck, not just a random scratch, deliberate, methodical gouges that spelled out, "Follow the rules," across the driver's side door in jagged letters. The black paint of his Ford F-150 was violated by deep silver scars that caught the morning light like accusations. Marcus set down his coffee with the measured calm of a man trained to control his reactions under fire. He walked outside, barefoot on the cold concrete, and examined the damage. The scratches were fresh. Metal shavings still clung to some of the grooves. This had happened during the night, while he slept 20 feet away, completely unaware. In Kandahar, such carelessness could have meant death. He surveyed his surroundings with tactical precision. No security cameras visible on neighboring houses. No convenient witnesses peering through curtains. The perpetrator had chosen their moment well, striking in the dead hours when honest people slept and cowards felt brave. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed Marcus was just another soft suburban dad who'd roll over when threatened. The mailbox held a pristine white envelope with his name written in careful script. Inside, an elegant letterhead announced, "Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, Notice of Violation." Dear Mr. Chen, it has come to the attention of the HOA board that your vehicle does not comply with community standards as outlined in Section 12.4 of the Residential Covenant. Specifically, your truck's aggressive appearance and excessive size create visual pollution that detracts from our neighborhood's family-friendly aesthetic. You have 48 hours to remove this vehicle from community streets and driveways, or face escalating enforcement measures. Regards, Patricia Blackwood. HOA President Marcus read the letter twice, his jaw tightening with each word. Aggressive appearance? His truck was stock. No modifications, no oversized tires, no offensive decals. Just a standard F-150 in basic black. The kind of vehicle driven by millions of Americans every day. He walked back inside and fired up his laptop, pulling up the HOA covenant he'd signed without much thought during the buying process. Section 12.4 was buried on page 37, written in the kind of deliberately obscure language that lawyers love and regular people ignore. Vehicles must maintain aesthetic harmony with the community's upscale residential character. No definition of what that meant. No examples provided. Just vague enough to be weaponized against anyone the board decided they didn't like. A knock at the door interrupted his research. Marcus opened it to find his next-door neighbor, a thin man in his 60s with nervous eyes and hands that fidgeted with a coffee mug. "I'm Jim Patterson," the man said, glancing around as if checking for surveillance. "I live at 410. Listen, I saw what happened to your truck. I wanted to warn you. This is just the beginning." Jim's story unfolded like a horror film script. The HOA wasn't just strict, it was predatory. Patricia Blackwood and her inner circle had systematically targeted anyone they deemed undesirable. A young couple was forced out because their daughter's bicycle was the wrong color. An elderly veteran whose American flag was too large for community standards. A single mother whose work schedule violated noise ordinances that apparently applied only to her. "They start with violations," Jim whispered. "Then comes the vandalism, property damage, late-night harassment, phone calls at all hours. They make your life hell until you sell and leave." "Why don't people fight back?" Marcus asked. Jim laughed bitterly. "Fight back? With what? They've got lawyers, money, and connections with the local police. Chief Morrison's wife sits on the HOA board. Code enforcement rubber stamps whatever Patricia wants. The system's rigged, son. Your best bet is to cut your losses and find somewhere else." But Jim didn't understand what he was dealing with. Marcus had spent years in places where corrupt systems were the norm, where might made right and the strong preyed on the weak. He'd learned how to identify enemy tactics, how to gather intelligence, and how to strike back when struck. As Jim shuffled away, shoulders hunched with defeat, Marcus felt something cold and familiar settle in his chest. The same focused calm that had carried him through night raids and hostage rescues, the same lethal patience that had made him one of the Army's most effective operators. The HOA wanted a war. They'd painted the first target on his truck, issued the first threat, drawn the first blood. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. Marcus spent the next 18 hours conducting reconnaissance with the same methodical precision he'd once used to map Taliban supply routes. He walked the neighborhood at different times, noting patterns, identifying key players, and cataloging weaknesses in what the HOA clearly considered their fortress of suburban tyranny. The intelligence picture that emerged was both fascinating and disturbing. Patricia Blackwood lived in the neighborhood's crown jewel, a colonial mansion at the end of Elm Street, complete with circular driveway and enough landscaping to qualify as a small park. Her husband drove a Bentley that somehow didn't violate any aesthetic standards. Security cameras covered every angle of their property, and motion-activated floodlights could illuminate half the block. The HOA's inner circle formed a tight cabal of 5 families, all residing on the same prestigious street. They'd systematically purchased properties that came up for sale, installing their allies and solidifying control. Board meetings were held in Patricia's living room, despite bylaws requiring community space. Voting was restricted through a web of proxy rules and meeting schedules designed to exclude working families. But Marcus had learned long ago that every fortress has its vulnerabilities. He began with digital reconnaissance. Property records revealed that Patricia's landscaping violated 3 city ordinances regarding water usage and protected wetlands. The HOA president who preached compliance was herself breaking multiple laws, shielded by selective enforcement and political connections. Financial records told an even more interesting story. HOA dues had increased 40% over the past 2 years, while actual community maintenance had been outsourced to companies owned by board members' relatives. Nearly $250,000 in community funds had vanished into special projects with no public accounting. On Thursday morning, exactly 48 hours after the violation notice, Marcus found his truck tires slashed. All 4 Michelin LTXs lay deflated in his driveway, victims of precision cuts designed to cause maximum damage while avoiding the security cameras he'd already identified and disabled. The message was clear: comply or face escalation. A second violation notice appeared in his mailbox, this one demanding immediate removal of his abandoned vehicle and threatening daily fines of $500. The language had grown more aggressive, more confident. They thought they had him cornered. That evening, Marcus attended his first HOA meeting. The gathering took place in Patricia Blackwood's oversized living room, exactly as his intelligence had predicted. 12 residents sat in uncomfortable silence while the board held court from antique chairs that screamed old money and inherited privilege. Patricia herself was a woman in her mid-50s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. Marcus entered quietly, taking a seat in the back row. Several heads turned to study the newcomer, and he felt the weight of hostile appraisal. These people had already decided he was the enemy. "As I was saying," Patricia continued, not acknowledging his arrival, "we've had several compliance issues recently that threaten our community standards. Some new residents seem to think our covenants are mere suggestions." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Marcus remained silent, observing. "The Chen property on Maple Grove continues to harbor an unauthorized vehicle despite clear notice. We may need to explore more aggressive enforcement measures." This was Marcus's cue. He stood slowly, and the room fell silent. "I'd like to address the board," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being heard. Patricia's smile was arctic. "Residents may speak during the designated comment period. Please wait your turn." "Actually," Marcus replied, producing a printed copy of the HOA bylaws, "Section 4.2 grants any homeowner the right to address specific accusations immediately. I'm exercising that right." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "Very well, but keep it brief." Marcus moved to the center of the room with the fluid grace of a predator. Every eye was on him now, and he could feel the board's confidence wavering. "My name is Marcus Chen. I'm a retired Green Beret, 12 years of active service, 3 combat tours. I came to Willowbrook Estates seeking peace after spending over a decade fighting in places where law meant nothing, and bullies ruled through intimidation." The room was dead silent now. Imagine my surprise to find the same tactics here in suburban America. Vandalism in the night, threats disguised as official notices, property damage designed to force compliance through fear. Patricia started to interrupt, but Marcus's gaze stopped her cold. "I've reviewed the covenants thoroughly. My truck violates no specific regulations. The language you're citing is deliberately vague and selectively enforced. You've exempted your own oversized vehicles while targeting mine. That's not governance. It's persecution." Board member Richard Walsh, a pale man who owned 3 rental properties in the neighborhood, cleared his throat. "The board has discretion in interpretation." "The board has overstepped its authority," Marcus cut him off. "I've also reviewed your financial records. Interesting how maintenance contracts keep going to companies, owned by your relatives. How HOA funds disappear into special projects with no community oversight." The silence was deafening now. Marcus could see panic flickering in several faces. "But here's what concerns me most," he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Last night, someone slashed my tires. Criminal vandalism designed to force my compliance. In Afghanistan, we had a term for people who threatened civilians under cover of darkness. We called them terrorists." Patricia shot to her feet, her face flushed with rage. "How dare you come into my home and make such accusations?" "Your home?" Marcus smiled without warmth. "I thought this was a community meeting in neutral space, as required by your own bylaws. Unless you're admitting the board operates as your personal fiefdom." The trap was sprung, and Patricia had walked right into it. Several residents exchanged glances, and Marcus could see doubt spreading like wildfire. "I want that man removed!" Patricia shrieked, pointing at Marcus with a trembling finger. But something had shifted in the room. The spell of fear was breaking. For the first time, someone had stood up to the tyrants and lived to tell about it. Marcus turned to leave, then paused at the door. "I'll be in touch about those tires. And Mrs. Blackwood, the next time you want to send a message, have the courage to sign your name." The war began at dawn the next morning. Marcus woke to find his mailbox stuffed with violation notices. 17 separate infractions ranging from excessive window blinds to unauthorized doormat color. Each citation carried escalating fines, building toward a crescendo of financial punishment designed to force surrender. But the HOA had made a critical tactical error. They'd underestimated their opponent's resources and resolve. Within hours, Marcus had filed complaints with the State Attorney General's office regarding HOA financial irregularities, contacted the EPA about Patricia's illegal wetland modifications, and submitted detailed evidence of selective covenant enforcement to the county prosecutor. Each submission was methodical, documented, and devastating. By noon, the first cracks appeared in the HOA's fortress. The local newspaper received an anonymous tip about missing HOA funds, accompanied by forensic financial analysis that would have impressed a federal auditor. The story hit the afternoon edition with a headline that sent shockwaves through Willowbrook Estates. HOA Board under investigation for financial misconduct. The article detailed how nearly $300,000 in community funds had been diverted through shell companies owned by board members' families. Landscaping contracts inflated by 40%. Emergency repairs to buildings that didn't exist. A paper trail of corruption stretching back 4 years, all hiding behind the veneer of community service. Patricia Blackwood's phone rang non-stop as reporters sought comment. Board member Richard Walsh received a visit from the county tax assessor, who seemed very interested in his undeclared rental income. The carefully constructed web of corruption was unraveling in real time. But Marcus wasn't finished. That evening, he received an unexpected visitor. Chief of Police Donald Morrison stood on his doorstep, hat in hand and expression troubled. The man was younger than Marcus had expected, with the bearing of someone struggling with divided loyalties. "Mr. Chen, I need to speak with you about recent events." Marcus invited him in, offering coffee that the chief accepted gratefully. They sat in Marcus's sparsely furnished living room, two men sizing each other up across an invisible battlefield. "I'll be direct," Morrison said. "My wife sits on the HOA board. Patricia Blackwood has been pressuring me to arrest you for harassment, trespassing, and making terroristic threats. And will you?" Morrison sighed deeply. 3 years ago, I might have. Patricia has influence, connections. She helped fund my campaign. But I've been doing some checking on you, Mr. Chen. Silver Star, Bronze Star with V device, Purple Heart. You served this country with honor. I served the Constitution, Marcus corrected quietly. Same oath you took. That's what my conscience keeps telling me. Morrison leaned forward. I've also been reviewing complaints about the HOA that my department has ignored or suppressed over the years. Property damage, harassment, intimidation. We called them civil matters and looked the other way. Marcus waited. Good interrogators knew when to let silence do the work. Patricia didn't just target you because of your truck, Morrison continued. She's been systematically driving out veterans, minorities, and working-class families to make room for her wealthy friends. She saw your service record and decided you were a threat to her control. She was right? Morrison laughed grimly. Yeah, she was. But here's the thing. I can't protect her anymore. Not with state investigators crawling all over the HOA finances. Not with the FBI asking questions about mail fraud and conspiracy charges. FBI? Turns out using HOA violation notices to threaten and intimidate residents constitutes mail fraud when it's part of a broader criminal conspiracy. And those shell companies Patricia set up, they crossed state lines, federal jurisdiction. The pieces clicked into place in Marcus's mind. His methodical documentation, his strategic timing, had triggered an avalanche that was now beyond anyone's control. 2 days later, the endgame arrived with sirens and flashing lights. Federal agents executed search warrants at 5 Willowbrook Estates properties simultaneously. Patricia Blackwood was arrested in her pajamas as neighbors watched from behind curtains. Board members Richard Walsh and Margaret Foster were taken from their offices in handcuffs. The local news crews captured every moment, broadcasting the fall of Willowbrook's suburban dictators to a fascinated audience. The charges were extensive: mail fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement, intimidation, and civil rights violations. The FBI had built an airtight case using Marcus's intelligence as the foundation, then expanding their investigation to uncover a network of corruption that reached into City Hall and the police department. But the real victory came 3 weeks later, at an emergency HOA meeting held in the community centre, neutral ground, as the bylaws required. The room was packed. Residents who had suffered in silence for years finally felt safe to speak. Stories poured out like water through a broken dam. The young couple whose daughter's bicycle was too colourful. The elderly man whose American flag was inappropriate size. The single mother was targeted for excessive noise when she worked night shifts to support her family. Marcus listened from the back row as victim after victim recounted their experiences. The pattern was clear. Patricia and her cronies had weaponized the HOA to create their own private kingdom, free from anyone they deemed undesirable. The vote was unanimous. The old board was dissolved, new elections scheduled, and the covenants rewritten to prevent future abuse. Marcus was asked to serve as interim president, a role he accepted with the same sense of duty that had once driven him to serve his country. 6 months later, Willowbrook Estates was a different place. Property values rose as word spread about the neighborhood's transformation. New families moved in, bringing diversity and vitality. The HOA focused on genuine community improvement rather than petty tyranny. Marcus kept his F-150, of course. It sat proudly in his driveway, battle-scarred but victorious. The key scratches had been repaired, but he'd kept photographs as reminders. Sometimes the Tree of Liberty needed to be refreshed, even in suburban driveways. On quiet evenings, he'd sit on his porch with a cup of coffee, watching children play in streets that were finally free. The neighborhood had found its peace through conflict, its harmony through courage. A former Green Beret had come home from war only to find another battle waiting. But this time, he'd won more than a tactical victory. He'd liberated an entire community,